It feels wrong to speak about this, like I'm breaking a long-held silence that was meant to be kept forever. The house my grandmother left me doesn't feel empty. It feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for me to leave so it can exhale. Some experiences burrow into your mind and never let go, replaying in the quiet moments before sleep. I don't usually share this kind of thing with many people, but I know some of you understand how certain events can haunt your thoughts long after they're over. If you're one of those people, someone who understands these lingering shadows, make sure to subscribe. It genuinely helps to know I'm not the only one out here trying to make sense of the inexplicable by sharing these stories. The most unnerving thing at first wasn't a sound or a specific event. It was the weight of the silence itself. In my old apartment, there was always a hum. Traffic, neighbors, the refrigerator. Here, the silence is so absolute, it feels like a physical presence pressing in on you from all sides. It's a dead quiet, thick with the smell of dust and decay. The late autumn sun barely penetrates the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows that crawl across the floral wallpaper. Sometimes I'd watch the dust motes dance in those weak beams of light, and it felt like I was watching the microscopic decay of a life, of a whole history, right in front of my eyes. The entire place felt preserved, like a tomb nobody had disturbed for 50 years. My memories of my grandmother are of warm hands, the smell of baked bread, and a constant gentle hum as she worked in her garden. But this house tells a different story. It's cold, secretive, and unwelcoming. Every creak of the floorboards sounds like a sigh of resentment, every draft a cold whisper. I started to feel like the woman I remembered was just a facade, a pleasant story I told myself. The reality of her life, the one contained within these four walls, was something else entirely, something heavier and darker. There was a strange, disorienting feeling, as if the foundation of my own past was beginning to crack, and I was terrified of what might crawl out from the fissures that were starting to form. Let me be clear. I didn't move into my grandmother's house for sentimental reasons. I moved in because I was broke. A month after she passed, I was laid off from my job, and the city apartment I could barely afford before suddenly became an impossibility. Her house, sitting there paid off and empty, was a grim sort of blessing. The plan was simple: camp out there for a few months, sort through a lifetime of accumulated possessions, slap on a coat of paint, and sell it. I saw it as a temporary hardship, a stepping stone to get back on my feet. My grief was a quiet, dull ache in the background, but my financial panic was a screaming siren. The house was a solution, and I was determined to treat it as nothing more than that, a project to be completed. The inside of the house was a time capsule of faded grandeur and slow decay. The air was thick with the scent of mothballs, dried lavender, and something else, a faint, sickly sweet smell I couldn't place. It clung to the heavy velvet curtains that blocked out most of the natural light. Every surface was coated in a fine layer of dust that seemed to regenerate overnight. The furniture was old and ornate, with dark wood that drank the light from the room. A persistent damp chill had settled deep into the bones of the place, a cold that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. The thermostat could be cranked up, but certain corners of the rooms remained stubbornly, unnaturally frigid, making the hairs on my arms stand on end whenever I passed through them. My cynicism had always been a shield for me, a way to rationalize the world and keep my emotions in check. But alone in that house, it started to feel thin and useless. I had no one to talk to. My friends were busy with their own lives, and I was too proud to tell my family how bad my situation had become. The isolation was total. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting grey light outside the window. I spent my time surrounded by the ghosts of my grandmother's life, her clothes still in the closet, her teacup by the sink. The oppressive silence and solitude started to wear me down. and I began to wonder if the unsettling feelings were coming from the house itself, or if my own stressed-out mind was starting to fracture. The first real break in my forced normalcy happened about a week after I moved in. I was in bed, trying to read, when I heard it. A faint, scratching sound. It was coming from my grandmother's former bedroom, the one room I had kept sealed shut since my arrival. At first, I dismissed it as mice. The house was old, pests were inevitable, but the sound wasn't the frantic skittering noise a rodent would make. It was slow, rhythmic and deliberate, a long, drawn-out scrape followed by a pause, then another identical scrape. It was a methodical sound, like a fingernail being dragged slowly and purposefully down a wooden plank from inside the wall. It was a sound that had no business being there, and it made my blood run cold. My first reaction was annoyance, not fear. I got up, walked to the hallway, and banged my fist hard on the wall next to her bedroom door. "Hey, get out of there!" I yelled, feeling foolish. The scratching stopped instantly. I stood there for a moment, listening to the oppressive silence rush back in, and felt a small sense of victory. I went back to bed, convinced I'd scared off whatever squirrel or rat had found its way in. But the next night, at almost the exact same time, it returned. Scrape, pause, scrape. The same unhurried, patient rhythm. This time, I didn't get up. I just lay there listening as the simple, rational explanation of pests began to feel thin and utterly unconvincing. That sound became my nightly tormentor. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, as I'd lie awake for hours, waiting for it to start. The rhythm was maddeningly consistent, a slow, grating metronome, counting down to something I couldn't comprehend. I started avoiding that entire wing of the house, even during the day. Her bedroom door remained closed, but the sound seemed to bleed through the wood, a constant low-level reminder that I wasn't alone. It felt personal, targeted. It was as if something was on the other side of that wall, fully aware of my presence, and was patiently, deliberately, trying to get my attention, or perhaps trying to get out. My pragmatic worldview was starting to crumble under the weight of that simple, repetitive sound. Then, as suddenly as it began, the scratching stopped. For 2 nights the house was silent, and I foolishly allowed myself to believe it was over. But the silence was soon replaced by something far more insidious. I'd be in the kitchen making coffee, and hear, from the living room, the distinct, delicate clink of a teacup being placed on its ceramic saucer. Or I'd be sorting through a box of old papers and hear the soft, papery rustle of a page being turned in the armchair across the room. Once, I even heard a faint humming, the very same tuneless melody my grandmother used to hum when she was sewing. Each sound was brief, perfectly clear, and would vanish the instant I turned my head to look. It was psychological warfare, using my own memories of her as a weapon against me. The house itself began to feel sick, as if some sort of infection was taking root within the walls. The cold spot in the living room grew more pronounced, a patch of air so frigid it felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Then came the smell. It would rise from the drains without warning, a putrid, sulphurous odor like rotten meat, so strong it made me gag. I'd pour bleach down the pipes, and the smell would vanish, only to reappear a day later from the bathroom sink instead. The most disturbing change was with the old family photos lining the hallway. I came home one afternoon to find every single one of them slightly askew, not knocked down, just tilted. In each photo, my grandmother's face was now partially obscured or turned completely away from view. The intrusion soon became more direct, more personal. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find every single cabinet and drawer standing wide open. Nothing was taken, nothing was even disturbed. They were just open, a silent, orderly violation of my space. I spent an hour trying to convince myself I had done it in my sleep, a manifestation of stress. But I couldn't explain away what I found a few days later. On the dusty surface of the hallway mirror, traced by what looked like a finger, were 2 words: "Get out." I stared at my own pale, terrified reflection behind the letters, my breath fogging the glass. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the cloth as I frantically wiped the message away, as if erasing the words could erase the reality of them. The feeling of being watched became a constant, suffocating weight. I was a prisoner in this house, and my own mind was becoming the enemy. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a figure in my peripheral vision, and every creak of the old structure was an approaching footstep. Was I losing my mind? Was the grief and stress finally causing a complete breakdown? Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has ever been through something like this, to feel their own reality systematically dismantled piece by piece. That's why I keep sharing these stories here. If you enjoy these strange accounts and want to hear more, please subscribe. It genuinely gives me the strength to continue recounting these experiences, knowing someone out there understands. I finally broke. After what felt like an eternity of sleepless nights and days spent walking on eggshells, something inside me snapped. The constant low-level dread had curdled into a volatile mix of terror and rage. I was tired of being afraid in my own home, tired of questioning my sanity, and tired of being toyed with by an unseen force. I stood in the dead center of the living room, my body trembling, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles were white. The silence felt heavier than ever, mocking me. I took a deep breath, the dusty air scraping my lungs, and decided I was done being the victim. If there was something here with me, it was going to have to face me. I couldn't take one more moment of the silent psychological torture. "Is that all you can do?" I screamed, my voice cracking, echoing unnaturally in the stillness. "Hide in the walls. Make noises. What do you want from me?" I paced the room like a caged animal, yelling at the empty chairs, the dusty curtains, the oppressive shadows. "Show yourself! Come on! Stop hiding like a coward and show me what you are!" For a long, humiliating moment, nothing happened. The only response was the echo of my own desperate voice fading into the thick silence. A wave of shame washed over me. I was just a man, alone in a house, screaming at nothing. I felt my anger deflate, leaving behind only a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion. I was truly losing my mind. That's when it happened. In the corner of the room sat the old television, a monstrously heavy CRT model from a bygone era. Its thick power cord was coiled neatly beside it, definitively unplugged from the wall socket, with a deafening crackle of static electricity that made me flinch violently. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a picture, just a chaotic, churning sea of black and white snow, a blizzard of pure noise. The sound was a deafening, roaring hiss that filled the house, drowning out everything, including the frantic pounding of my own heart. I stared at it, frozen in place, unable to process the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. An unplugged television, dormant for decades, had just turned itself on. From the roaring static, a sound began to coalesce. It started as a low murmur beneath the hiss, slowly gaining shape and texture. It wasn't one voice, it was two, impossibly intertwined. One was the soft, gentle tone of my grandmother, a sound I knew from my earliest childhood memories. But it was twisted together with something else, a deep, guttural vibration that felt ancient and malevolent. The two voices spoke in a discordant, layered unison, creating a harmony that was fundamentally wrong, a perversion of a cherished memory. It was the audio equivalent of seeing a loved one's face melt and distort into something monstrous right before your eyes, and it was the single most terrifying sound I've ever heard. The composite voice spoke a single word, and the sound of it broke my paralysis and plunged me into a new depth of fear. Alex. It was my name. Hearing it spoken by that grotesque fusion of my grandmother and that thing was a violation on a spiritual level. It wasn't a question or a greeting. It was a statement of ownership. It knew me. This wasn't a random haunting, a spirit trapped in a house. This was personal. This was something that had been waiting, that knew my name, my history. I felt a cold dread spread through my limbs, rooting me to the spot. I was no longer just an intruder in its space. I was the specific target of its attention. She promised. The horrible dual voice rasped from the television speaker, the sound crackling with static. She promised us a place to stay, a warm body to keep the cold away. The words made no sense, yet they carried a weight of absolute conviction. We gave her peace. We gave her a long life. We kept her secrets safe in the dirt beneath the floorboards. She was happy to forget what she'd done to get this house, to forget the one who came before her. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the implication. The image of my kind, gentle grandmother was shattering, being replaced by a stranger, a woman who had made some kind of terrible bargain. The voice leaned into its revelation, the guttural undertone growing stronger, almost eclipsing my grandmother's twisted tone. She thought death was an escape from the deal. She thought she could leave the debt for the house to pay. But the debt isn't in the wood or the stone, Alex. The debt is in the blood. A cold wave of understanding washed over me. It wasn't the house it wanted. I hadn't inherited a property. I had inherited a predator. I was the final payment on a debt I never knew existed, a debt my grandmother had left for me to settle. My entire life, my connection to her, was all a lie built on top of a monstrous secret. As this horrific realization cemented itself in my mind, the single exposed light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered violently and then exploded with a deafening pop. Glass rained down around me as the room was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The only light was the faint, dying glow of the TV screen, which flickered once more and went black. The roaring hiss vanished, leaving a silence more profound and terrifying than before. Then, from the darkness, came a new sound. It wasn't the voice. It was a low, dry, mocking laugh, and it wasn't coming from the television anymore. It was coming from every corner of the room, echoing all around me, right beside my ear. My memory of what happened next is a frantic, blurry nightmare. I don't remember running, but I remember the feeling of crashing into furniture in the pitch black, my hands scrambling across dusty surfaces in a desperate search for my phone. The mocking laughter swirled around me, a multi-toned chorus of amusement at my terror. My fingers finally closed around the cool glass of my phone, and with trembling hands, I dialed 911. When the operator's calm voice answered, I could barely form words. I was sobbing, gasping for breath, trying to explain that someone was in the house with me. "Please," I begged, whispering into the phone. "The lights exploded. It's in here with me. I'm at my grandmother's house on Oak Street." I was huddled on the floor, trying to make myself as small as possible, convinced that at any second a hand would close around my throat. The dispatcher was trying to keep me calm, asking if I was hurt, telling me to stay on the line. I was trying to answer her, trying to tell her about the television, about the voice, but my own breathing was too loud in my ears. And that's when I heard it, right next to me, a voice so close I could feel the puff of air against my cheek. It was my own voice, but it was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of the panic that was causing my entire body to seize up. It spoke clearly into the phone, a perfect, rational mimicry of me. "Everything is fine here, officer," it said, its tone soothing and reasonable. "I'm sorry to have bothered you. My friend here is just having a nightmare, a really bad one." The dispatcher's voice on the other end became confused, asking who was speaking, asking me to confirm what the other voice had said. But I couldn't answer. I was frozen, listening to the calm, steady sound of my own voice telling the operator that everything was okay, that no help was needed. The last thing I remember hearing was that gentle, stolen voice of mine saying, "We're fine now. Thank you," before the line went dead. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened in that final moment or in the moments after, but as long as these memories keep haunting the quiet corners of my mind, I'll keep sharing them here. If you stayed to the end and want to hear more, subscribe. It really helps to keep this space alive.